at 4:58 a.m. in Seattle, Washington. While the city slept under holiday lights and routine calm, federal task force vehicles rolled without sirens toward a target no one expected, an operation described by investigators as the moment the illusion of safety fractured. This was not a border stop or a warehouse sweep. According to federal authorities, the objective was a powerful national law firm, one of the largest in the United States. A symbol of prestige and legal authority, agents moved fast through glass corridors and marble floors, seizing files, disconnecting servers, forcing open conference rooms as Mohammed Hussein, 46, and Faduma Ibrahim, 34, attorneys known publicly for elite legal work, were taken into custody amid allegations that stunned even seasoned investigators. What unfolded, officials said, was not a routine drug case, but an alleged command structure for a transnational criminal enterprise linked to CJNG, operating not through violence, but invisibility. Investigators described a system built to blend seamlessly into American life, with drugs moving through suburban warehouses labeled as food, supplements, or medical supplies, trucks arriving in daylight, shipments pressed into counterfeit prescription pills, orders transmitted through encrypted apps, and payments flowing digitally through layered accounts designed to survive raids and arrests. According to agents, this was a business calibrated for scale, with supply timed around school terms and holidays, targeting younger users first. A distribution model that relied on silence rather than gunfire. As the investigation widened, analysts traced what they described as a global pipeline, stretching from chemical shipments leaving ports in China, diverted to laboratories in Mexico, then hidden in cargo containers crossing oceans, bypassing traditional borders entirely before feeding U.S. distribution hubs and allegedly culminating in Seattle. Federal data painted a grim backdrop. In 2025 alone, Washington state recorded 3,588 overdose deaths, with fentanyl involved in the majority, King County surpassing 1,000 deaths in a single year, and nationwide, fentanyl becoming the leading cause of death for Americans aged 18 to 35. Authorities stated that the quantity seized in this operation was capable of producing millions of lethal doses, a scale that shifted the government response from surveillance to immediate intervention. What began as an investigation, officials said, became damage containment against a system already moving faster than traditional enforcement, marking a moment when federal agencies concluded this was no longer about stopping crime, but about preventing mass loss of life. Quietly, the situation escalated into a full-scale interdiction, a meticulously coordinated strike aimed at dismantling the CJNG network before it could adapt or vanish, and before dawn, Washington state entered what senior officials later described as a war-level posture, deploying more than 900 federal agents across DEA, ICE, FBI, ATF, and state task forces in a synchronized operation spanning urban centers, suburbs, ports, highways, and rural corridors. As the first light crept over Seattle, helicopters lifted into the air. Drones patrolled industrial zones and residential blocks, locking down potential escape routes, while armored vehicles and tactical teams positioned outside targeted locations. Hazmat units prepared for toxic exposure from fentanyl and chemical residue, and at precisely timed intervals, doors were breached simultaneously across dozens of sites, warehouses secured as reinforced locks were cut, armed guards intercepted, digital devices smashed by suspects before agents gained entry, gunfire narrowly avoided through speed, and explosive materials recovered, confirming fears that violence could erupt in seconds. While at sea and port-adjacent sites, hazmat teams controlled container openings, finding tightly sealed packages of fentanyl and methamphetamine wrapped to avoid detection, and for 48 continuous hours, teams rotated shifts, executing warrants, securing evidence, and transporting detainees, culminating in thousands of pounds of narcotics seized, weapons removed, and cash and digital assets frozen mid-transfer, with officials later confirming that the operation crippled the CJNG's East Coast supply chain. likely preventing thousands of future overdoses and shattering the cartel's carefully maintained illusion of invisibility. Yet, when the raids ended and the noise faded, investigators confronted the more complex truth that the network's damage did not vanish with arrests. As financial analysts traced a labyrinth of cryptocurrency wallets, shell companies, and legal trusts designed to appear legitimate, profits moved in small, time transfers to evade detection, and legitimacy itself was weaponized through contracts, leases, and filings that passed inspections because nothing outwardly appeared criminal, revealing a system that reshaped trust, commerce, and safety across entire communities. Emergency calls and hospital admissions had quietly surged in neighborhoods tied to distribution, with families recounting repeated overdose incidents and students unknowingly consuming counterfeit prescription pills, demonstrating the hidden lethality of a network that relied entirely on normalcy, paperwork, and professionalism to thrive, while internal reviews across agencies sought to tighten shipping inspections, financial oversight, and operational protocols, acknowledging that the network succeeded because it never appeared criminal, eroding public confidence even as authorities moved decisively to confront the threat with unprecedented coordination, force, and resolve. Safeguards and vigilance are only effective against criminals who act recklessly. The Washington operation demonstrated that the most dangerous networks thrive when their operators are patient, disciplined, and willing to wait, and federal briefings stressed that while the raid dealt a major blow, it was not the end but a warning that cartels had learned how to exploit America's open economy, logistics systems, and trust-based institutions, and that they would adapt and reappear in new forms. Investigators concluded that this network relied not on fear or chaos, but on comfort, the quiet assumption that danger always looks dangerous. And by the time that illusion was shattered, harm had already reached deep into homes, schools, and families, manifesting not just in pounds of drugs or stacks of cash, but in broken families, eroded trust, and the quiet spread of fear across ordinary American life. With public health data revealing rising overdose deaths in suburbs and small communities once considered insulated, emergency responders recounting calls to homes with no history of crime or warning signs, and families asking in stunned disbelief how such devastation could arrive silently, often through pills mistaken for familiar prescription medication, one dose sometimes proving fatal. Older Americans, raising grandchildren or caring for adult children struggling with addiction, faced the impact differently, but just as profoundly, as communities built on social trust grew suspicious and anxious, wary of packages, deliveries, or sudden behavioral changes. While first responders, paramedics, firefighters, officers experienced fatigue, frustration, and psychological strain from repeatedly saving lives, sometimes failing despite their best efforts. And faith leaders, school administrators, and community organizations were drawn into addressing grief, anger, and fear, realizing that the threat had not come loudly or violently but quietly through systems the public trusted. Federal briefings emphasized the sobering truth that the crisis cut across age, income, and background, affecting veterans, students, professionals, and retirees alike, with no obvious street-level signs to avoid, as the cartel exploited familiar channels, shipping routes, online platforms, and everyday transactions, making traditional crime prevention insufficient and leaving investigators to stress that combating cartel-driven drugs required awareness, communication, and community vigilance alongside enforcement, with families having honest conversations, institutions adapting quickly, and communities remaining alert, because until these vulnerabilities were addressed, the threat remained quiet, patient, and waiting. By the time briefings reached Washington, one conclusion was unavoidable. The Seattle operation had not merely dismantled a cartel cell, but exposed a new phase of the drug war inside the United States, a phase in which threats no longer respected borders or fences but learned to live comfortably within American systems. And while the crackdown had severely disrupted the CJNG's East Coast supply chain, preventing thousands of shipments and likely saving countless lives, federal leaders warned that cartels would adapt, testing new routes, concealing operations behind legitimate fronts, and applying the same discipline that allowed them to hide in plain sight, proving that these organizations now function less like street gangs and more like multinational enterprises, studying markets, tracking demand, and constantly evolving to exploit opportunities wherever they arise. Criminal networks exploit technology faster than regulations can respond, and they rely on a single, dangerous assumption that most people believe that something this brutal would be easy to recognize. And it is precisely that assumption that allowed the Seattle network to grow, forcing institutions and the public alike to confront uncomfortable truths. Open economies rely on trust, logistics on speed, legal and financial systems on honesty. And when those strengths are manipulated, damage spreads silently and efficiently, making the threat far more severe because it operates not through noise or chaos, but through routine and comfort. Officials emphasize that enforcement alone cannot win this fight. Raids can disrupt, arrests can dismantle, but long-term defense requires awareness, with families understanding that danger no longer looks dangerous, communities recognizing that addiction often announces itself quietly, and institutions assuming they are potential targets rather than exceptions. A lesson particularly acute for older Americans accustomed to visible, violent, and localized drug crises, because this threat arrived through familiar channels, using familiar names, and wearing familiar disguises, walking through doors rather than breaking them, proving that when agencies coordinate, share intelligence, and act decisively, the system can fight back, stripping away the cartel's invisibility and collapsing supply chains. But officials warn that such victories must not breed complacency, because the most dangerous moment in a long fight is believing it has been won. The Seattle case offered no ending, only a signal to law enforcement, policymakers, and the public that the threat remains real. Methods will evolve, and the cost of ignoring it is measured not in dollars or seizures, but in lives, revealing a weakness not in one city or one institution, but in how modern society interprets danger, having long assumed that crime is loud, chaotic, and visible, when in reality, the most destructive threats now move quietly through systems we trust, institutions we respect, and routines we depend on, exploiting legitimacy, paperwork, and professionalism as shields, and for years, that belief worked in their favor, demonstrating that the lesson is not merely about drugs, but about complacency in an open society built on trust, which becomes a vulnerability when assumed rather than verified, when speed replaces scrutiny, when reputation substitutes for accountability, and when normalcy discourages hard questions. The families destroyed by fentanyl and the affected communities did not fail. They operated under assumptions that no longer hold in a world where criminal networks study our systems as carefully as we build them, showing that enforcement alone is insufficient, and prevention now demands awareness at every level, with institutions questioning safeguards, communities discussing risk openly, and families understanding that danger no longer announces itself, because silence is no longer neutral, and when systems are quietly exploited, inaction becomes part of the problem. Yet there is also reason for measured hope, because when agencies coordinated, shared intelligence, and acted decisively, the system worked. Supply chains were broken, routes of operations collapsed, and lives were likely saved, proving that vigilance is not paranoia, and accountability is not optional, but essential for survival. With the choice now extending beyond law enforcement and policymakers to the public, requiring everyone to stay informed, engaged, and questioning of routines, understanding that modern threats are patient, disciplined, and waiting for indifference, and that the lessons of Seattle written in evidence, arrests, and the silence after the storm serve as both a warning and a test of attention, responsibility, and resolve, with the cost of failing that test measured in lives, making awareness itself a crucial component of defense.